Be talking about something that is an ongoing theme in a lot of my writing and a lot of my ideas having to do with the network effect, which is the source of a lot of the power that's behind the censorship that's going on all of the internet platforms. My experience with the network effect goes back to the origin of the computer networks back in the early 70s. The Plato network was a fairly advanced version of what would eventually become the internet with social networking. And in 74 I developed what is widely regarded as the first intersubjective virtual reality, which is over the wide area Plato network. If you go into one of these games, it was a game, like many games, if you go into these games and there's no other players, you don't really want to play very much. You can play a little bit with the 3D figures and stuff like that, but it's not that much fun. It's much more fun to have other people around. So, when there were a lot of people around, other people wanted to get in, and it had a 32-player limit at that time. And it could fill up. But if there wasn't anybody around, nobody'd come in and stay around. So it was a problem trying to get things really started. But it became popular, and it was okay for a while. But that was my first experience with what is now known as the network effect. More people around, more people want to join in. It's like the phone network. The phone network is something you don't want to join if you can't call anybody. If there's only one other person, well, if you want to call that person, that's valuable to you. But what if 50% of the people are in that network? You really want to be on it. And in fact, this is why it's essentially a monopoly. The internet is an extreme example of this kind of business model. In fact, Sand Hill Road doesn't really want to talk to people that don't have a network effect in their business model much anymore. And the reason for that is fairly obvious when you think about it. If you can lock your users in by mere scale, then you can pretty much ride your customers and not really have to do much in the way of competition. Because if somebody wants to compete with you, and they're starting out with no users, well, nobody wants to go to them even if they have a superior system. This is the problem that Steve Jobs had with MS-DOS. He had a system that he said had to be compellingly better. Well, yeah. And then Windows came along after MS-DOS and continued to ride on top of Apple and making it marginal for many years, even though Apple had superior technology in many ways. What happened with Bill Gates was he had purchased an operating system for the 8086, and IBM distributed it with their PC. And since IBM was a big name, they got a lot of PCs out there with MS-DOS. And if you wanted to get your software delivered to customers, you had to write your software for MS-DOS. And if you were somebody who wanted to use software, well, you had to buy MS-DOS to run the software. So Gates could sit back on that network effect of software writers and software consumers and become the world's richest man. Like the phone company, well, Lily Tomlin had her character that was on Laugh-In, I believe. Ernestine, the operator, says, "We don't care, we don't have to, we're the phone company." And it's like that with all of these guys. MS-DOS, Microsoft, and now we're seeing it with YouTube, Twitter, and all of the other network effect social networks like Facebook, of course. But there are many others as well. Uber is one, Airbnb, eBay, PayPal, Patreon. You go there, they have a system set up so that you can interact with these other people, and it becomes more valuable simply because of the size of the customer base, or the vendor base, which is in conjunction with the customer base. It's a platform network effect. This is actually a very ancient thing. It goes back really to the foundation of civilization, because cities are high real estate value areas due to things like the network effect. If you have a bunch of people in a small area, they can all interact, and then a lot of land there becomes valuable, not necessarily because anybody did anything with the land there. It's just because the land is where it's at. So this is old enough, this effect is old enough that it has become an integral part of civil societies. And there are adaptations to this, as one might be expecting to see with something that's very ancient. One of the adaptations is when you start out and you're trying to establish a polity, let's say, or a civic society with a bunch of individuals out there, say each of them has a little homestead with their farm, and you want them to join together in mutual defense. One of the things you might try is saying, well, let's all get together in a mutual defense organization, and we'll treat it sort of like a mutual insurance company in an anarcho-capitalist model. Lysander Spooner actually talked about this as being the only legitimate form of government, but we won't go too far into that. I'll just say that once this kind of thing is set up, where you've got, in effect, a mutual insurance company, and each man buys into the mutual insurance company, offering his service to defend, also paying for the mutual defense, and also having a share in this mutual. This is also important because he's got a stake in the network effect that's created by this and can profit from that network effect. Once that's established, the people in power have an incentive to shift the fees that are paid from essentially you have more land, you pay more of a fee for defense of the land, to taxing economic activity and reducing the fees for property rights. And that's because if they're powerful, they've acquired property rights and they don't want those property rights taxed anymore. And they can ride the network effect as civilization grows and enjoy more and more wealth without having paid taxes on it, because they've decoupled the cost of protecting property rights from the value that they're receiving. So that's really an old trick. It's really old. If you've got a new culture, like the settler culture of the United States, hasn't developed that as well. Back in 1913, there was the income tax that sort of started really exhibiting this. And then in the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, opening up the world to come to the United States from cultures that were very, very old and had gone through this evolution, so that you had very highly adept people at rent seeking economic rent, or the benefits of network externalities, of the positive network externalities. They flooded in, and now you see Silicon Valley with all of its network effect companies taken over by people from these older cultures. They don't want the settler culture of the United States to start waking up to this fact. And the people who are supposedly representing the settler culture, let's say Samuel Huntington, Harvard, who actually coined the phrase settler culture in the United States. At least he coined it for the Ivy League. Or you have the alt-right folks, Spencer, who comes from a fairly well-to-do family, real estate, I think, and any of a variety of others. And then you get to people like Donald Trump. Nobody's really talking about the fact that the tax base is on economic activity, and except at the very most local level, ignores the property right values. Libertarians are really disgusting in this respect, because if you ever suggest shifting the tax base from economic activity to, say, liquid value of property rights, they'll call you a communist, even though it's closer to Lysander Spooner's vision of a mutual insurance company than is the current taxation system on economic activity. The vast majority of these people are simply bots. They have never thought anything through very deeply at all. But these bots are being manufactured by the Austrian School of Economics, so there really is no excuse for those people. And on the other hand, you've got the leftists who are supposedly supporting communism or Marxism, and they don't really go after this problem. In fact, the Communist Manifesto talked about a graduated income tax, a tax on economic activity, rather than going after the network effect wealth of monopoly. So what happens is we've got network effect companies on the network, the internet, and they're collecting economic rent. And you have very sophisticated people who are highly adept at getting this economic rent, coming in and censoring the settler culture of the United States. The settler culture has no leadership that will alert them to the fact that this support from economic rent of these parasites is really the source of the censorship power that's coming after them. What do we do about this? Well, it's a good question. One of the things we might do is simply recognize the fact that these people are doing precisely what I'm talking about, seeking out network effect monopolies and doing whatever it is we can to neutralize their control over these network effect monopolies. These are people. They aren't corporations, they are individuals. And they can be targeted for what they are doing. How one targets them is really an open question. But for example, the way people are being targeted on, say, the anti-immigration front is they are being exposed, publicly shamed for what they are doing. Perhaps there's something that could be done in this way to the people who are sitting on top of these network effect companies. Certainly there's not going to be any help on this regard from the people who are claiming to be Marxists, because they're all cultural Marxists now. They don't care about working class people. They in fact like the idea of centralizing wealth and making it so that government has to interfere more and more in the marketplace, because they are political parasites. They can go under the government and grab control of the centers of power, which is another way of rent seeking. So this is just basically a little short presentation to try to alert people to the fact that they're really barking up the wrong tree when they say go off to Gab and try to set up things there or start up all these alternatives. It's going to be very difficult to do that, just like it's very difficult to set up an independent phone company and have anybody pay attention to you.